Hello, Alexey. On one hand, I don't think I need to introduce you to anybody. On the other hand, I think some people are not entirely sure who is Alexey Arestovich, because you have very many facets to your personality. An officer, a psychologist, and many other things, right? You got a lot of achievements. I'm a professional officer with an oath to the country. People know why do I have 7 battle medals at 33 missions out. And I did survive that landmine. Very few people do. I think that during the whole war, there were only 2 cases of people who walked alive from this. Alexey, many people know that you've been advisor to the president of Ukraine, but not many people know that you are a professional military officer in the rank of lieutenant colonel. Alexey, how do you usually introduce yourself to people who do not know what you are? I don't have this problem, Nikolai. I usually meet people who are aware of who am I and what do I do. So everybody knows you? Well, except for the foreigners. For them, I just introduce myself as Alex. So just very minimalistically, you say Alex? Yeah, why do I need to bring in the whole regalia into the conversation? People usually get from the conversation whom they're talking to, whom they're interfacing with. Alexey, in my experience, I learned of you as an oracle, as a predictor. My friend of mine, my girlfriend, sent me a link to one probably of the most popular videos with you, where you predict the beginning of this war. With reality of 99.9%, our price for aspiring to join NATO is a big war with Russia. How do you mean? Well, attempt to attack Kiev, big military operation on the front, attempt to get to us from Crimea, attack to Ukraine from Belarus territory, probably airdrop around the Kiev vicinity with a probability of 99%. When? 21, 22, 2021 or 2022. One can say, Alexey, looking at this video, that you predicted events that happened, and you also were predicting that conservative turn in the global world. I also think that many people do not understand what exactly is changing and what the old world was compared to the new one that's emerging. Even the ones studying political science are also giving very different views on what's happening. And I see some shock and awe, and instead of being capable to explain what is happening in the world, what is happening in the United States, on our side of the world, we hear slogans that Trump is a dictator, Trump is a crazy gramps, and he could go mad, and there are a lot of caricatures about him and J.D. Vance. And I'm quoting one Russian politologist that America will be thrown back to the 19th century after they dismantle the institutes of soft power. Alexey, what can you tell these people? Is America making a step forward or moving backwards? Well, Nikolai, first, these people who are commenting it like this, they're weak people who failed to understand the new paradigm. The weakness of a person very often reflects an inability to take a different viewpoint and analyze things differently. Now, many people project onto conservatives, onto Trump's team, their own fears. And it reveals how people are weak and very ill-adjusted to changes. And this concept of fear of death, fear of new things happening that may lead to destruction. I unfortunately do not have any pity to these analysts, because my main feature is being able to work with reality the way it is. Any attempt to escape it causes me to experience a feeling like in Bulgakov's, when Voland was talking to Berlioz and the pawns, and how he was seeing the character trying to avoid reality. Alvin Toffler wrote in his Third Wave about future shock. He even introduced that as a meaning. And now that's what we're experiencing. Quoting Perslegan, future is not, and he's quoting Strugatsky in turn. The fear of future is not that it's scary, it's just different. It's very not the one that was expected. And we know from evolutionary theory is that your survivability is being determined not by the force and the strength of the organism, but by capability to adapt. For a person, first of all, it is capability to adapt the consciousness. And of course, it is connected to the core of your personality when you are changing. It's connected with your biography, with the money you have. A good example is interrupting funding to Radio Freedom and Voice of America. And the public that lived their lives in that paradigm, that this was one of the pillars of one of the holy things that they saw being present, it's being dismantled. As I wrote in one of the posts, there is a type of intelligentsia post-USSR which think stopping funding stopped funding considered to be a civilizational change. And if they need to move to another township or other place to live, they think it to be the end of the world. So it is very different from person to person, but this is one of the main weaknesses of people in general when they fail to adapt. And okay, so Alexey, that kind of reminds me of the concept of the virus, the mental virus, the concept-based virus that spreads among people, right? Indeed. And the more people need some support, very often they grab onto these concepts which don't really provide any support. They may provide some comfort, but they unfortunately do not give you any strength. So, Alexey, many people are saying that still the introduction of Trump to American politics is a step backward, and it will, like Zelensky also mentioned, that Trump may actually destroy the framework of the future world. And you're still saying this is a movement forward, right? Yes, moving forward is always related to the destruction of the old. So is it always good, Alexey? Depends the viewpoint that you're looking at it from. If you go into a meta position to a bigger system, of course, it's always for the better. If you're looking from the destiny of a specific amoeba, then probably adding some manganese to the solution would mean a catastrophe to her little world. But for scientists, it's experiment, and it's pushing the science forward. So the main question, I guess, Alexey, in this regard, is it a reaction that we're seeing, or is it a revolution? Because many people expect it to be just 4 years, and after 4 years, it will be all rolled back. This is probably the biggest crisis throughout my whole life, says Mike McFall. Yeah, but it's only 4 years. We'll see what happens later. Nikolai, this is not a reality, and this is a projection of expectations, what people are saying about 4 years. Ukraine also lived in these estimations and expectations. They hoped this war would be done in 3 weeks, but it's not. And it's a problem of many intellectuals. They can code very simple human fears into very beautiful words. And that's what's happening with a lot of liberals right now, or the leftists. It's not Trump who had prevailed. It's the trend that prevailed. And inside the trend, Trump and Vance and Musk have won the leadership. The right turn in the world is not because Trump, Vance, and Musk gathered together and decided to do something. They managed to get together and do something because the whole world is making the right pivot. In Europe, they got 7 right-leaning governments. It's not Trump and Vance who built them, right? So let's talk about, Alexey, why is that bulldozer needed? Why that destruction is needed? What was wrong with those liberal institutions that were supposedly for freedom and democracy? And what is happening now? Why that dismantling was needed? Well, let's start with the thing, Nikolai, that the liberal project is dead. Well, Democratic Party has 29%. Something is still smoldering. Oh, Nikolai, people can vote for ancient Egypt if they want to. It doesn't mean that it exists. You can spend a lot of money to restore Byzantium, but it doesn't mean that it exists. Democracy made a huge circle, huge lap. It ran it to its completeness and returned back to the beginning. People initially on the liberal side were for people's freedoms, and they ended up with repressing people's freedoms in our recent times. And that shows once again that this is the end of this cycle, because the development, according to Hegel, goes on a spiral, and when something turns back to the area where it started, it means that the previous needs to be dismantled. And what are the liberals of the 18th century, 19th century? Those were people for total individualism, for freedom, for dominating of the better qualities of a person over the crusty societal institutes. That was the banner of any smart person who was willing to join that movement. And today, Democrats are the ones who are saying, have you offended somebody with your look or with your tweet? Maybe a person of color living somewhere in Alaska who may be upset with this? And they added the slogan that my freedom is over where ends where the nose of my neighbor begins. But since, I guess, simple calculation, the more people we have on Earth, the less freedom we do have. The noses and neighbors are closer and freedom is weaker or lesser. So this is a false slogan. At some point it was needed. It helped people to move civilization further. And these views developed in the 19th century moved us forward so far. But it's time to change it. It's time to replace it with new development. And since we need to introduce changes, There is a big layer of society who says that how change? Why change? This is our core beliefs and core fundamental elements. Are you suggesting us to get rid of it, to denounce it? This is a catastrophe. If you are telling us to do that, it means you are bad. And what we also were taught is that the good always trumps the evil, and there is always good and evil, right? And that means that Trump and Vance are probably evil, and so in 4 years they'll be smitten away and everything will return back to the original point. This is not thinking, Nikolai. This is suffering dressed in projections. I see that you're also interested in people who are not exactly a simple bunch, who have very interesting views and aspirations. What I'm also seeing is that a lot of commentators, a lot of public figures have unfortunately very shallow depth, and they're failing to grasp this change. Alexey, I agree with you to some degree, but also how do you marry the rhetoric of Donald Trump with you saying that this all is for good? Because I do support the dismantling of certain democratic institutes because they were chasing negative liberty, and understand that if you remove all limitations surrounding your person, you may end up in despotism or high-handedness as an environment. And in the process, you may also drift away from all the norms and traditions as a society, from your usual flow. And while we do hear Trump's rhetoric, I appreciate the business approach and all, but all these accusations that come from him sometimes in regards to his political opponents, is it good? What I'm asking is to highlight the question of ethics in politics, because I think Donald Trump is not about ethics. Well, no, Nikolai, he is about ethics. The conversation is about ethics. But let's dot the I's and cross the T's. First of all, Trump is not a shining light for me. I do not pray to Trump, Musk, and Vance. I do not consider them to be pillars of the development of humanity. I think I am the pillar of human development, right? Personally. Oh, right. From Aristotle to Arestovich, right? Exactly. So, since I do speak a lot about what have they done, and that I try to present it in a good light, it is often being treated and understood as ethical good, while I'm implying mostly technical goodness in their actions. For example, close radio freedom and leave 1,000 people without job. It may be ethically a questionable thing because their families get their funding cut, but it may be a good technical move because you're fighting with your opponents and you're removing the rubble of that leftist world that was being built. So to understand what I mean, one needs to understand that what I'm talking about is a technical good, not ethical good. Imagine the big wrecking ball that destroys the old house. And I'm looking at that saying, this is good. And not because the house is being destroyed, but because the hit was good and the process of dismantling is going successfully. So Trump is that wrecking ball. Perhaps we can expect a lot from Vance when he comes, if he comes later to power, but Trump is definitely that wrecking ball that very effectively destroys the old. Alexey, do you think the elite groups had chosen Trump to take upon himself to help them dismantle that? Nikolai, I do not believe in the elite groups and the behind-the-scenes groups. I've been at some of the gatherings of the top Republicans in the United States. They are normal people. They, just like everybody else, can also be inspired by symbolic figures, by some symbolism around it, and Trump managed to inspire them. This is the matching of the inspiration. And if you could be a genius, but if you're not a figure of the moment, you will not get that support. He managed to ignite them. Plus, of course, Musk had joined his side. That was a very important factor to get the younger Americans to vote and support the side, because Musk is representing move to Mars, to Tesla, new technology. But you can explain many things in hindsight. But in reality, you just need to be the figure of the moment in the right push. It's an old question. Can Tchaikovsky be born in a tribe in Africa? Of course he can. But what will he be playing, right? He needs a proper environment to get most effective use of his talent. Mozart was composing things at 3 years old, not because he just could, because he was born in a family where father was one of the most prominent teacher of music in Europe, with all the methods and everything. If Mozart was born in a family of a shoemaker, he probably would have become a musician still, but probably much later in life, 20 plus, right, with more difficulties. So such a unique coincidence of these events, it's almost like a heavenly sign that this person is chosen to do it. And one can say that that's why the bullet just grazed his ear while killed somebody else in a crowd. When the person comes and says that the God has chosen me to realize it, and the fact that I survived the assassination attempt is proof, that shows the way he thinks. And I tend to think in the same way. The same thing happened with Zelensky in the 19th when he was elected. If you know, he was led into the elections as a technical candidate. Most bets were on Yulia Tymoshenko. He was sent in as a spoiler who will take some votes, but it turned out so differently. So all those elite groups in Ukraine made a mistake in their calculation. That's why we should not be ascribing to these elites more power than they have. Right, Alexei, we just lived in an environment where it was a saying that the presidents in the United States change, but the politics of US do not change. Well, now we can say that the world is changing, and Donald Trump is not just an icon of some elite conservative groups that came to power, but he is more of a event of the moment, and he's presenting a certain moment, a certain force. Right, and Trump is not an app in the phone, not an app in the system for anybody that you can subscribe to and press button and fund. It's not how he works. And it's interesting also to discuss who J.D. Vance is, because many people are laughing at him as the stupid youth. However, there are some very good philosophers stand backing him, like Peter Thiel, Patrick Denyon, whom you've been mentioning too. So my interpretation of what's happening is the breaking that we see is reconsidering the results of Westphal system when people decided that they do not need to discuss limits, they do not need to discuss the matters of faith. And at some point in 2000, when Osama bin Laden hit the towers in the US, they experienced a shock because the Western civilization was developing, was evolving without the matter of faith. So suddenly this force comes in, and bin Laden was a relatively rich person. He had hundreds of millions of dollars behind him. So with posting a different vector. And similar thing happened in the Enlightenment theory when people decided that we can distract our society from fighting wars by educating them. And I think now we're revising both John Locke's and Stuart Mill's concepts, who decided that our goal is a social progress, is a continuous liberation, and what Isaiah Berlin was calling a negative freedom. So I think right now the review process is undergoing in the world, in the United States, and you're saying very interesting words about J.D. Vance as a person who thinks about common good and who thinks in this category, because he has chances of becoming a president of the United States. Alexei, what is the category of common good that you've been introducing? Oh, that's an old good category, Nikolai, of Aristotle and Plato, that politics represents the idea of doing common good. And common good is usually the shining idea that can lead people behind it. And Vance's ideological teacher, who's also Catholic, who steered him to also taking Catholicism, that is a sign that, look at Vance, he's a young person, relatively young, who created a break in his biography 3 times already. He was born in a rather poor environment, right? So there was very little future for him, but he broke that ties. He did not have chances for getting high education or any societal promotion. He went to the path of the military, then studied in one of the elite universities, and then made another pivot, married an immigrant, and started a family with her. And then he also pivoted into Catholicism, and that's another pivot in his life. So if one is to monitor the life of a person, pay attention to the breaks in the biography, because those crises are the ones that you want to pay attention to specifically. And being selected into special services, there is actually a group of questions in this regard. So you can, of course, concentrate on the parachute jumping and achievements and all. That's great questions. But the better questions are targeting the crisis that the person went through, because those give you additional forces and give you a chance to mutate and change into something new. And the whole biography of Vance is the biography of changes, of transcending and emerging on a new level. All right, so Vance is not dumb, Alexei, right? No, he is definitely not dumb, and he may be not exactly in the framework of the Harvard professor who cares more about black lesbians and Palestine, but he is very wise, commonsensically wise, because the person who went through 3 serious disruptions in his life and successfully emerged after them, that is a very good result. And even if you were inspired by some ideological teacher, it still is worth that to understand that the person managed to overcome the circumstance. And then when he was giving an interview to Spiegel, he actually mentioned that Vance is the first politician in the top level of the United States who doesn't think in the terms of the axis of evil, of good and bad. Yeah, Vance indeed doesn't have that attitude of those wayward people who don't want to move towards progress. Exactly, that's not about him. Look at his speech at the Munich conference. Is that a speech of a silly person? Of a dumb person? Of course not. Look at his vocabulary. First of all, just the vocabulary in the speech, and then how it is used, how it is analyzed, how it is woven together. Because you can see from that speech the philosophy. And philosophy, in its essence, is the science about the things in this world and how they're connected. So whether he wrote this speech or whether somebody wrote it for him, he took the authorship whenever he voiced it at the Congress. And this is a speech of a person who very well understands causation and who can see certain things that other people do not, that some people are still grasping on the old concepts that are due to be gone. Alexey, another philosophic question to you. Do you think humanity can overcome wars at some point? I think we had an answer as globalism at some point and spent a third of the global GDP to try to get there. But I think now this question appears to be removed from the agenda. Do you think we will go after solving this, or perhaps go follow Carl Schmitt or Jarre and say that we are mimetic beings who always aspire to get something that somebody else has? And this is the driver. This is the basis of our civilization. And that's why we will never be able to overcome war as a tool. I'll answer like this. Abdullah, I lived my life as a poor man, and I begged the God to send you good clothes and good riding gear. I was waiting for a long time, but then the God told me in my ear that you can mount the horse and take what you need because you're brave and strong. And as you probably recognize, I'm quoting Abdullah from The White Sun of the Desert, a cult movie of the Soviet times. So this model, let's ask ourselves how true it is. Us as mimetic beings, perhaps because we do not know what we want until we see that. If it was not so, then marketing would not be effective. But does it mean that conflicts are inevitable? Or a next question, does it always have to be a war-like event to bind your enemy to a certain will? Probably for foreseeable future, it will remain in some fashion. Probably as long as there is politics, the wars will remain in certain shape or fashion. Politics will remain as long as there are differences between people. So it implies that the wars also will likely be in our orbit forever. Alexey, I did ask this question because I was very curious to hear what you answer, because with the help of economy, people try to fix a lot of different situations. All right, Nikolai, the attempt to establish globalism was an attempt to counter military globalism. When military attempts to unite world failed, then America and Europe decided to use monetary aspect to unite the world. And now Trump is still using economy, but in a different fashion. He's trying to organize joint ventures, parity-based joint ventures. Will it solve the global problems? No, but it might alleviate some regional issues that we have. And perhaps wars will become more scarce. Perhaps instead we could invest our money into the projects of the century. Or perhaps if we go into space in a more organized and more forceful fashion, that might increase the threshold to start the war on the ground here on Earth. Because the volume of problems and issues that we're facing at that frontier, that would provide us a whole other slew of applications for our creativity, military, and many other functions and features that we can. So it likely will just distract and draw our attention from here to out there. And that's what Musk is trying to do, for which I think we as humanity should be thankful. All right, Alexey, we will talk more about space a bit later, but let's also address the things on Earth here. Everybody's talking about a 30-day ceasefire, that it may happen. You're giving even a better prognosis, saying that the hot phase of the war will likely be done with this year. You think this is likely what's going to happen? With a very high probability, yes, Nikolai. Of course, the situation moves 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but still it's going in that direction. Both sides are interested in stopping the hot phase of this war. It doesn't mean that they are done conflicting about issues, but I have almost no doubts that this phase is about to end soon. It doesn't mean that there will not be a stage 2. So, Alexey, will it be Minsk 3, Minsk 4? You can call it Istanbul 2 or Ariad 1 or whatever. There'll be some agreement. The contents of this agreement is another matter. Right, you did mention that there is some framework agreement that was achieved between US, Russia and Ukraine, but many people do oppose that agreement and oppose freezing the war because very few people are excited about another prediction that you made back in 2019, that there'll be a second round. Cue in an excerpt from Alexey's interview back in 2019. Right, the next round will be around 28:30. Do you think there'll be a peace solution to Donbas problem, Alexey? No, never. And all these economic sanctions for a country like Russia, Iran has been for 40 years under sanctions, much heavier than Russia. And Russia is bigger than Iran and more influential and richer, more resourceful. Returning back to the present interview. So, Nikolai, understand another thing. Ukraine is a holy wound of Russia. Russia will never let Ukraine be. Never. The question is, what can we do with it? Does it have to be in a form of military conflict? No. The condition for military conflict is the threat emanating from Ukraine to Russia. In this iteration of war, it was nominated as the threat of Ukraine joining NATO, the threat of growing of nationalism. Overall, it was pointing at Ukraine as a project with a core status of anti-Russia. And there were some roots to this back in the 19th century. And as a result of it, we have a model of Ukraine, one of them, as anti-Russia. Running ahead of this topic, it means that Ukraine also is not independent because it actually creates counter-dependency between two countries. And if you're counter-dependent, you cannot be independent. So when some groups in Ukraine took upon themselves that slogan about independent, but contrary to Russia, Ukraine, in the 90s it resulted in the book by Kuchma, Why Ukraine is Not Russia. Ukraine failed to find its deep core entity, failed to find that bedrock to lean upon. You can glimpse of it in literature, in music on occasion, in art, but overall the narrow Ukrainian project is a failure, and it brought the country to chaos and to war with Russia. So Russia is definitely carries the blame for this war, but Ukraine has some responsibility for leading this to these events. Because even if it was not Ukraine and Russia, it was just two sides of the conflict, the blunt heads and the sharp heads. And if the blunt heads built their politics that they are the counterpart to the sharp heads, then eventually the sharp heads will take it into consideration and start fighting them or opposing them. If Mexico would have behaved like this against the United States, there likely would be a conflict there. If Portugal positioned itself like this to Spain, there likely would have been continuous conflicts. So there will never be a peace between Russia and Ukraine, Alexei? Well, if there'll be a condition of threat, there'll be no peace. But if Ukraine will find a neutrality, a true neutrality would allow us to coexist and be probably unified against something together, and then also compete in some other parts together with each other. Alexey, you also posted several theses. One of them, for example, was about the deal with rare earth minerals, that it actually is a big security for Ukraine. Donald Trump comes out and says that I am the best security for Ukraine because Putin respects me and would listen to me and would not go further. But then one can post a question, well, Donald Trump is only for 4 years. Nobody knows what will be after. The deal on rare earth minerals, the fact that probably nobody would want to bomb and to attack American joint ventures, perhaps it's true. But still, this is not the most stable guarantee of security, Alexei. One can imagine a different president in the US, or perhaps see American investors leaving this joint venture, and then your guarantees dissipate. Well, that's why, Nikolai, I never called it the real guarantees of independence or security. I call them the best of possible, because if we also attract Chinese, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and the others, if the investments from these countries will be in our major industries of economy, then of course riding tanks on the fields that have Saudi Arabian investments, or bomb railroads where India has a share of, or destroy seaports that are heavily used by China. This is an interesting proposition, and that actually can bring more stability and guarantee some security. The only real security guarantee, if we're talking about those, would be readiness of United States or any other country to actually come to aid of Ukraine and fight directly the Russian invasion if that happens. That guarantee we'll never get. So we can dump all the conversations about the real guarantees into the trash bin. And the fact that Ukrainian top-level politicians are using these statements or these concepts, it tells that they either misunderstand a lot of things or they blatantly lie to the people of the country. Today, Sybiga, Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, made a curious statement. He said that, I understand that NATO doesn't want us, but we in Ukraine have not cancelled this aspiration. We wrote it into our constitution. You have to deal with it, he says to 32 countries of Europe, right? Other NATO members. So the only real security guarantees for Ukraine may be given only by Russian Federation. Oh, I was waiting for you to say Alexey Arestovich. No, Russian Federation, because that's where the threat is emanating from. And look, Putin created a situation where in the Eastern Europe, the main, when he is the main threat and main donor of security. Basically, if I want to, you will be insecure, and if I will make a different decision, you will be very secure. And no America can do anything about it. So the question is, what should Ukraine do? Right, I think Ukraine needs then to establish its own Ukrainian politics. Exactly. Find our core, find our essence, find what we stand for, and then fly to Moscow and say, guys, it's been difficult. We've been killing each other. There was a terrible war. But let's right now start creating a system of collective security that could be multi-level, multi-step system that will guarantee Russia there is no threat coming to it from the territory of Ukraine. And second, that there'll be no threat to Ukraine on the same conditions from Russia, because these guarantees can only be mutual. If in Russia there'll be politicians who can pose the question this way, then we can come to agreement. If no, there will be war. A second war, a third war, a fourth war. Alexey, is that something that you would do? Absolutely, Nikolai. I would do that as one of the first steps. I'd fly to Moscow and say, Vladimir, or whoever else I need to talk to there, let's stop this war. Let's compete as much as we can on the diplomatic and economic and other levels, but let's stop the hot phase of this war. We need to stop killing each other. 10 million Ukrainians have direct relatives on the territory of Russia. Why are we doing this? Like that story about the Russian pilot who was taken prisoner after his plane was shot down bombing the city where his parents live. This is not good. Right, Alexey, it all dead ends in the issues of trust. I think if Ukraine stopped thinking in the nationalistic fashion, perhaps with your participation, that dugout of Ukrainian Liberation Army project would come to an end, then perhaps there'll be a better future. And I think we need to think about how to do it, how to bring it upon. Nikolai, the Ukrainian Liberation dugout is destroying itself. It actually, in fact, is a collection of a bunch of little dugouts, small, stinky. Oh, stinky? Well, what else? I mean, it's a dugout, right? It's smelly. So they will be attacking each other. The representatives of this vision will be attacking each other, and you will see how the heroes of war, after the hot phase is done with, will be blowing up certain political figures because of disagreements. Oh, we'll get back to this, Alexey, but let's also finish the possible contours of peace agreement that we can envision, because Ukraine would need to agree about something, right? We can, of course, paint it with very wide paintbrush, but Nikolai, you really want to go deeper into the details? These are so minute things. Well, I think it's not just me. I think it's Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky who want to discuss that, and probably Russian peoples too, because they need to come to some agreement about certain points. You know what? Because there are a lot of people in Russia who appeal to not agree to anything, and basically suggesting that Ukraine would fight till the last of Ukrainian. So, Nikolai, what do these people solve? They create the mood, first of all, right? Exactly. They create the mood that doesn't solve this problem. But those who make decisions, they're not really swayed by these moods. And as you mentioned, that very often those who are swayed, they're not in Ukraine or Russia, or they very often are in Canada or someplace else. And the leaders of these different dugouts, they feel that the world is leaving them, that situation is changing, and they're screaming, we better die and live than live in a different Ukraine. That kind of mirrors what Putin said, that if there'll be a threat to Russia, then we'll just use the nuclear war and everybody dies. You die and go to hell, we go to heaven. Do you despise people, Alexey, who suggest to fight till the last Ukrainian while they're not even in Ukraine and they're not related to possible draft? Probably not despise, but despise times despise. That's my attitude to these people. So, do you think the peace treaty that will be achieved this year, Alexei, will be stable or not? Because I think there'll be crucial questions about the numbers of military in Ukraine, the status of Russian language, territorial aspects, how they will be discussed. But looking at what you are suggesting, it sounds like Trump, Putin, and Xi will definitely get their pieces of this world. Right, Nikolai. So the key matter is that we probably will not agree to would be the number of troops in Ukraine. Russians will have to find certain courage to allow Ukraine to have probably 300,000 troops, or at least 250. I doubt we'll agree to something lower than that. Now, we'll see if Trump's and Xi's bonuses will be more important for Russia than the number of troops in Ukraine. That'll be the key point. What will Trump offer? Because nobody in their sane mind will agree to Russian proposals to have Ukraine only the army of 90,000 people or maybe 50 jets. So, Alexei, this sounds like a big milestone that they need to come to agreement. At the same time, there is a conversation that there will be some agreement. Right, there will be an agreement if Trump manages to make a better offer, commercial offer to Russia and China, because ultimately it's about money. And even the troops, if Ukraine will have 300,000 army, this is not really a threat to Russia. And it's mostly about the desire of certain people in Kremlin who want to keep Ukraine disarmed. So at any moment when Trump disappears, they can solve the matter in 3 days and close it, just like they wanted to do between 24th and 27th of February when they started this war. And they want to bring upon conditions when Ukraine will lose the next round very quickly to Russia, so that when the world awakens, it is mostly occupied by Russia already. But I want to say that Russia should not even hope for that outcome. This is not what's going to happen. We will not create this situation. Now, we'll see how adequate are the leaders in Kremlin, because if they will continue insisting on this, there likely will be no peace ever. But note that there will be no peace, but keep in mind, if they're listening to us, that fighting with Russia throughout the whole 2024, having spilled a ton of blood, they took a territory the size of Nagorno-Karabakh, even with the current state of Ukrainian economy and troops. And if somebody who comes to power in Ukraine next is going to be more effective than Zelensky, have you thought this one out? Because if somebody comes, and I'm not going to point fingers who, you will understand what the real war is, because compared to this, what's happening now on the front is bullshit. And Zelensky is destroying Ukrainian Armed Forces much more effectively than Russian Federation does. That example, the trap in Kursk district, right? Exactly. Or 45% fulfillment of the military production for 2024, instead of 100 or 105 as habitual for the country at war. Horrible cadre politics, endless corruption. Imagine if you do not remove all these problems, but just shrink them a little bit. I hear about a lot of corruption schemes, Alexei, but I lose my faith in humanity, because I cannot even imagine on the human side, how can you steal your own resources from your own army while you're fighting a war, organize some corruption schemes? So the main question, whether Zelensky was ignoring it or was he the one organizing it? Zelensky was the one organizing it, and he continues to. The thievery of American aid, general aid from the West, Ukrainian budget, and they're aware of that. Zelensky started the move by attacking Trump and Vance in the Oval Office because he was told what will happen later. And what will happen is that these schemas will be published, will become public. And that's when people in Ukraine will see how much did he steal on the blood of the soldiers, and nobody can predict how the events will unfold after this. So why do people do this? Because they fail to understand the matter of common good. It's not in their ontology. They understand their own wealth, their own $10 million or something, but they very often fail to understand the country at large. So your people are dying and you're stealing from your own people? Oh yeah, social Darwinism, that's I guess how they explain it. They do not necessarily think about the whole country. In the world, every second, several 10,000 people die. Should I live bad because of this? Right, this is a whole other rhetoric, Alexey, but on the official channels in Ukraine, you hear everything different. Look, we are supporting ours. Donald Trump, see the photos. Our prisoners that are being returned by Russia, our soldiers are tortured and ill-fed. So is it the first time, Nikolai, you're seeing that performance? He is an actor. Zelensky is voicing an actor, is voicing a role. It's not the first time. Look the history of southern Vietnam, for example. How did they treat their own people when the war was raging? Well, Alexei, maybe I'm naive, but I don't think we've seen that in the 21st century. Well, Nikolai, Ukraine is not in the 21st century. It's somewhere stuck in the 17th, I think. You have said many times, Alexei, that you will put Zelensky in jail if you come to power. Is corruption the only point of accusation? Listen, I will not be the one, Nikolai, putting him to jail. The court will do. I'll just make sure to provide the court with enough materials that they will not have another option. Corruption plus decisions that were not made on time or were made at wrong time. I am planning to make a special tribunal that will be investigating all the decisions made since 2014, since Russia occupied Crimea. And it's not only Zelensky who should be worried, Poroshenko as well, and everybody who participated in this, Turchinov and the like, on the generality, a lot of political figures, Tymoshenko, who were involved. They all will have to be present in front of investigation. If somebody goes out clean, great. But if somebody made mistakes, grave mistakes, caught corrupting things up, they should be in jail. Our society needs a vaccine at this point to show that you cannot be doing these things without punishment, because maybe in 10 years, but you will get your punishment. It's like in Romania. Any discussion about corruption ends when they remember Ceausescu. Ceausescu, as one of the Romanian politicians said, provided us with a great historical milestone for all Romanian elites. Alexey, another question. You've been in Ukraine in 2014 when we were observing all these horrible events. I learned about them later. I was too young at that time. How did you react? How did your environment react to those torch walks when pro-Russian activists were being thrown in dumpsters, when there were slogans that Russians should be hung on the trees, when in Odessa there was a big fire in one of the city buildings and European Court for the Human Rights acknowledged that Ukrainian authorities, regional authorities, are to be blamed for the events happening in Odessa when that fire was instigated, where people died. Right, I was, as a military officer, I was fighting the enemy who attacked my country, who occupied Donbass and who took Crimea. As a person who gave an oath to defend its country, I definitely was not walking with the torches myself, but let's remember that it was Russian Federation that took away our Crimea, that they were conducting hybrid operations both in Donbass and Odessa. That event was also. So when pro-Russian activists were put in dumpsters, one can remember that in Donbass, Russians were actually killing Ukrainian activists. So in that house in Odessa, I think that was a tragedy, and the main tragedy of this event is that people who created this tragedy, they actually got the status of national heroes. Demyan Ganov, who was recently killed in Odessa, he, according to many statements, was the one participating in setting this building ablaze, or creating conditions to set this building ablaze. And he was, however, written into heroes. And he was walking on the streets of Odessa for 10 years, and the person who burned 40 people, 2 cars in that building, and he was actually trying to be a power figure in the city. So if we had a normal state, what do you think would have happened to him? he would probably be in jail, right? Right, he would be in jail. Because it's against the rules to burn people, even if they are pro-Russian activists, doesn't matter. Even if they have committed crimes against Ukrainian government, you need to first detain them, investigate, and then put to jail. You do not set them on fire. And this is how I'm ready to deal with the enemies who are destroying the country to the people of which I gave my oath as an officer. By the way, a very weak formulation of Ukrainian oath, because you give an oath to the people of Ukraine, so nobody really cares about the government. Just a side note. But I understand when people burn in tank during war. I get it. When somebody hit it with a grenade launcher, but setting people ablaze while they're hiding in a house, this is wrong. And if the government would not have allowed that Liberation Army dugout to take over the power, they would have done proper investigation. They would have punished those who were acting against national security and those who tried to participate in burning those people in the building. Both sides would have been put to jail, and everybody around would have understood. And first, most importantly, in Kremlin, they would have understood that Ukrainian governance is strong. Ukrainian government will not allow foreign influence, but it will treat people justly. So this is the common good approach that we're talking about. So then when I get, and if I get a chance to rule this process, I will make sure that those who violate rules, regardless of where they come from, Moscow, United States, Zambia, our own Ukrainian streets, they all will get just retribution based on the investigation, everything else. They will understand rather quickly that life is more complex than in their childhood I want. And same thing, if somebody will look badly on a person speaking Russian, I think security service will be asking questions from that activist in a few minutes. In reverse as well, if somebody will attack a person speaking in Ukrainian in any fashion, the security services will have a conversation with that person as well, because the government needs to instill order in the country, an order designated for the whole good as a goal. And in the country that I rule, you either follow the rules or, how should I put it delicately, don't be upset if things don't work out. And I guess we also learned how these moods were created. For many people, it was a big surprise. I'm talking about USAID grants to our journalists in Ukraine, which up to 90% of them were funded by USAID. I remember your interview with Yulia Latina, where you did mention that there was a heavy influence. Was it a news for you as an intel officer in 2025 when all these became obvious? I think I figured that roughly by winter of 23. On the 27th of September, I had a ticket back to fly from United States to Ukraine, but I learned certain things and made certain statements in my streams that Zelensky gave immediate order to calm me down, as it was put. Is it connected to your statements? Yeah, it was connected to how I commented on his visit to United States and his aspiration to join NATO. So American friends told me to not go back to Ukraine, wait for a couple of weeks, and these couple of weeks have been extended for over a year and a half already. And they every time reconfirm that the danger is still present. So you are reaching out and you're getting the data regularly? Yes, I'm in political immigration and I'm getting the feedback. And it's obvious what is the cause of it. When Zelensky is removed from power, that's when I can come back. Being here in the West, it exploded the quality of my contacts and my friends here. So it expanded it greatly. And I think I learned new ways for acquiring more information, and my understanding of sequences of this war, of causation effects in this war, many things became more obvious. And yeah, that's how you got to that USAID. Yeah, that's exactly, besides USAID, many other things that I've outlined. There was a huge machine working, and USAID is only a small part of it. So what are the three main narratives that were pushed starting 2024? Well, first is that victim is always right. Second is that you are not a colony of Russia. And third, you need to hold Russia. You need to be the barrier. And for that, there were billions spent. I don't know about billions, but there were a lot of millions, that's for sure. And a million is also a big amount for Ukraine. We lost our own journalism. We have lost independent journalists since the end of the 90s. Our professors went to lie under American and Western grants. And it's obvious when, after surviving the dissolution of USSR and you are making money in philosophy or in literature or in journalism, your salary is, $20 a month. When you get an offer to do some grant research for $100 or $300 a month, you understand that you will save your family not just from starvation, but also will look very successfully. That looked very good for many people. And one very high-ranking American, taxi driver, said that the biggest mistake we ever made was that we gave up Ukrainian studies to the people who came from Ukraine, the wave of the second immigration. And those people were mostly relatives of the Ukrainian Liberation Army, of those dugouts, of those fighters during the Second World War. And this was the confession of a very high-ranked American politician, or taxi driver, as I say. So, Alexey, we saw a video of you in a suit, and you said that you filmed this video in Riyadh. I'm not going to ask you what contacts you have. You probably will not answer. Oh, Nikolai had no contacts there, just went there for an excursion, right? Right, you just looked at the Louvre and the... yeah, exactly. I was just serving as I was never fighting over. I was just a scribe in the headquarters. So you were making interesting statements about your presidential campaign. My target audience, Russian-speaking segment of the interwebs, I do want to ask you a question on their behalf. If and when Alexey Arestovych becomes the president of Ukraine, how will the main streets of Bandera and Shukhevich be called in Kiev? I would call them Vernadsky and Noosphere. That would be the names. Alexey, tell me please whether journalists who now work in Ukraine, who are selling Ukraine for the blankets, as you said in your statements, do you think there'll be a censorship for them when you come to power? No, there'll be freedom of speech. Another question about monuments. The monument to Catherine the Great, Catherine II, monument to Pushkin, to Vysotsky, will they be returned to their usual places? I think the monuments built on the money of the city should not even be touched by anybody but the city. And if there is a monument that is not needed, like Soviet Union times mode, they should be brought to the museum. And there should be a podium, there should be an excursion, and special segment of that presentation would be monuments of Soviet Union. And this will give people a chance to rethink the positive and negative experience that we obtained from those years. So that you understand, for example, there was a fellow called Sikorsky. His helicopters are built in the States, and half of the world is using them. He was born in Kiev. There is a house of Sikorsky still, and there is a cherry garden near this house where he was making his first models. His father was from the Black Hundreds. He was a monarchist. He was against liberation or any other thing. He was pro-Tsar. At the same time, he was a neurologist in Ukraine, and he built an institute that is still working. He was a specialist in kids' neurology, and his publication that he created on this topic is still functioning, and this is how it should be presented. That we're thankful to this person because he was researching kids' neurological diseases, that he was a big donor for medical research. Also, we do understand, of course, that he had certain political choices in his life. And then you go to the next monument, and that's how you present it, in all the pluses and minuses of real historic figure. Okay, Alexey, so the main thing now is to get elected, right? And I cannot not ask you this question. You probably do study some sociology. We do not have a representative picture of the moods in Ukraine, and your data is different too. In one of the streams, you said that the party of war is supported by 25%, but in the near interview to Yulia Latina, you said that, quoting, I appreciate schizophrenia, but when there are 65% of schizophrenics in the country, that is pretty bad. and then you corrected it to maybe 40%. How many of those that support war? I want to say about 35 maybe. But the thing is, when the war is over, when the hot phase is frozen, all these dynamics will become meaningless. I will bring you another example here. Poroshenko, on the 1st of December 2013, before he climbed the tractor that tried to storm the office of Yanukovych symbolically, he had a rating of maybe 1.5%. 6 months later, he won the elections in the first round with 54%. When everything changes, everything changes. There's an old Arabic saying, when the caravan turns to go back, the last camel becomes the first. You think the people will wake up, Alexei? I think they will. They are in a process of awakening now. Right now, we have a big part of Ukrainian society that very actively react to me. They do not support me, but it's not a difficult thing to switch the sign from minus to plus when the hot phase of the war ends. Thing is, people of Ukraine do not really have an exit. If they're thinking about future of the country, I'm the only figure on the political landscape who can provide them with some security in the foreseeable future. There is just no other figure, whether it's good or bad. For me, I think it's bad because I would love to just continue traveling the world, to travel India, to serve, to see other countries, but I can't. I understand that, God forgive me, I have a task. A mission, Alexei? You can call it a mission if you want to, but I just feel, and I pray that this cup would pass me by, because I do not want to be there. I've been there for 2.5 years. I know how much of a thankless and godless job it is. It's putting your ass on a hot frying pan. But if the time has chosen you, what can I do? I cannot be running away from my destiny, right? What about these Omars, Alexei? Yeah, I may not like it, but it's not in my nature to run away from it. So you guys don't have options, really. I don't understand why Ukrainians continue figuring out some other candidates trying to fight with me. They don't understand that all their troubles, all their worries, all their disconcertedness about future is related to them not understanding that I'm their future president. Because the moment you agree to that, you'd feel way better. You'd feel like at the beginning of this war when I was on the tribune, but even better. Just accept this as a fact. If it is not so, then, and I do not get there, I would not bet on the destiny of Ukraine. Ukraine will fail preparing for the second round of this war. And if it's not me, then the second round is practically guaranteed. If I'm there, then these are the tasks that I think I can tackle, I think I can be successful with. I can also help us build the right self-identification and bring more order to the country, when certain screams coming from certain dugouts would not be able to determine the government politics. So, dear bunnies, don't be so upset. Don't be crying so much. Just calm down, accept that Arestovich is your next president, and live with this thought for about 15 minutes, toy with it, and see how you will feel yourself. Your blood pressure will go down, you'll start sleeping better, you'll eat better, and you'll be upset much less. And your immune system will get stronger. You just don't have any other options, really. Just adopt this thought. Why do you fight with obvious reality? Alexei, I cannot even interrupt you here. Right, guys, you're wasting so much effort trying to run away from this reality. Alexei, I'm not even going to ask you how can that happen, because pro-Russian regions, Crimea, Donbass, and Lugansk, they'll probably be separated and they'll probably be voting for pro-Russian candidate, or I'm sure in your political strength, though. Nikolai, let me answer you as a reasonable man. Allah knows about the time and decisions. We do not need to be worried about that. We just need to follow through. Are you sure in your victory? Are you sure that you will win at some point? Well, this is the wrong statement of the question. I think in this current situation, this is the only variant for Ukraine to avoid the next round of war. They may not elect me. Then I just pack my bag and bless them. That's it. Alexei, I have not heard these brave statements from other candidates. You are pushing the idea about democracy is a failure and we need to be done with it. The only question is what instead of democracy, Alexei? I don't know, Nikolai. Monarchy would be nice, but I don't think we are ready to that as a society. But some form of societal organization that does not have the drawbacks of democracy. First of all, its inability to make real and fast decisions, because if Ukraine will fall into that voting gameplay, while we take months to vote, then court cancels and appeals that, we will just die dynamically. So you need to implement the martial law politics and direct presidential rule. Exactly. That's the scope in the near future, and the president will be personally responsible for all this, and appointed people will bear full responsibility too. There'll be freedom of speech, absolutely. That will not be cancelled. Actually, will reward people who are providing with creative and good criticism. So, are you talking about cancelling real elections? No, I'm not calling upon myself to be a monarch. The church needs to make that, if they are to make that decision. So, democracy is the process of legitimizing the elites. I think the monarchs have been before designated with the power of God, but since we philosophically killed the God, how will the monarch line, how can it reemerge? You know, I'm not going to be a monarch of Ukraine. I'm just saying I'm a better solution. I'm the only solution for them. But the God is the one who makes decisions about this. But you did say that you'd like to build Ukrainian empire, and you're not against it. Ukrainian Symphony. I want it to sound as a symphony, not as an empire. Empire implies expansion, territorial expansion with a bad flavor in your mouth. Of course, cultural diversity, it's the strength of it, more freedoms than in democracy in the empire. But I am not expansionist. I want symphony, like Korsavin style, Arestovich style. Alexey, there is one more topic that we touched upon today. It is associated with you, the topic of space. And to conclude our wonderful conversation, I wanted to give you a fantasy to tackle. Imagine that there are aliens visiting Earth. They understand our language somehow. They can read your, right, an earpiece, and they can read your mind, right? Yeah, so they have this solved, and they somehow get in touch with you, and or you're selected to talk to them, and you need to explain to them what's happening here on Earth. And how would you explain briefly what's happening here? Like if they ask you a question, why do people fight on this planet? I would ask a question differently first. I would ask, can I hug you? I can send you that heart emoji right now. And after that, you don't need words. I think words break a lot of things, Nikolai. Only the conditions and statements of your inner self, they tell a lot more. A last question then, Alexey, more adventurous, especially for you. If after that, these aliens would offer you to leave this planet, leave everybody here, only you can go, leave Ukraine, but for the most adventurous journey of your life, just without an option to come back. Intergalactic travel throughout different planets and universes, but you'll never be able to come back. Would you agree, or would you decide to stay and try to save people here? I don't know. I don't know, Nikolai. That's an honest answer, Alexey. I thought you might have given a different answer. No, I'm not going to fall into trying to convince everybody that I want to save them. This is a side effect of my personal growth, that I'm trying to save somebody. Adventure throughout the galaxy sounds very appealing. It goes in the direction of personal growth. And I'm not a savior, one needs to understand that. I'm just walking my way, but if you're smart enough or willing enough and your path is somewhat parallel, you can join me and walk with me for a while. And perhaps get saved at some point from some things. But I'm not the savior. I'm about personal evolution. For me, Earth and Ukraine is a canvas where I want to draw something beautiful. You may agree or disagree with that, that's your problem. But let me ask a counter question. Why such an interesting term? Why cannot I come back? I'm not an alien, Alexey. We're just fantasizing here, right? I understand that you want both. Well, this would be my question. Friends, I would like to perhaps go on a trip and then come back with new knowledge and paint that beautiful picture that I want to paint. And I would ask them this question. Why can't I come back? Why such a strange condition? It is, Alexey. it'll probably due to the amount of time that'll pass, because if you return back, you'll return to a very different planet, a very different Earth. Right, okay, Nikolai, just give me some time to think. I have not made my mind yet whether I'm a bodhisattva or Buddha. I'll come back with that question later, next time. Thank you, Alexey, for being with us today. Thank you.